Fought for primary custody and increased child support after my ex moved away to focus on vacations over our kids. Now he's mad. So my 33F, ex Harry, 35 male, and I have been divorced for 6 years. We dated a bit in high school when I visited a relative in his hometown, which is a major city, for the summers, but I would break up with him when I went back to my city for school, which is about 2.5 hours away. Not the most mature I know, but even my parents were like, you don't need a LDR before you can vote. We kind of kept in touch on Facebook, lol, at the time, but my sophomore year of college he ended up transferring to my school. We got back together and got married basically right after I graduated and moved to my hometown city. Our kids Matt, 11, and Elise, 8, came pretty quickly and we had a few good years before. Stop me if you heard this one. I just felt as if I was already a single mom of 3 kids and was sick of working, doing all the childcare, and all of the cleaning, / cooking, planning. We tried therapy but ultimately decided that it wasn't going to work. For 3+ years it was fantastic. We had a wonderful 50-50 co-parenting relationship. He was such a better father when he had them all to himself, and I had the breaks that I had been begging for. We agreed to never badmouth the other in front of the kids or make them responsible for our feelings or anything like that. We didn't have to spend a fortune on a divorce because we were able to amicably work everything out, which only benefited our kiddos. In later 2022 he let me know he had gotten back together with Amy, 35F. He said her name a bunch like I should know who she was, and I finally asked and apparently she was the girl he had dated when I was not in town, before we reconnected. I was honestly happy for him. I'm not interested in dating TBH, my kids are too young and I work a lot and have a ton of friends and family. Amy lived in his hometown and I know he visited her a lot when he didn't have the kids. We were week on week off, but he always was there for his parenting time. The kids met Amy and said they liked her a lot, so I was happy. My parents were also divorced but found other people while still being amazing parents, so I was really hopeful. But in 2023 he let me know he had proposed and would be moving back to his hometown to be with Amy. I was pretty stunned because he was such a dedicated and present father and asked how he expected that to work. He was insistent that he wanted to keep 50-50 custody but admitted he could only do every other weekend parenting time. Before he moved we didn't have any sort of alimony or child support or anything since we were 50-50 and split big expenses evenly. He said he would keep splitting big expenses evenly and offered me child support since my expenses for the kids would be going up having them so much more. Not that I was complaining about that. Again, we wanted to work this out ourselves mostly. Why spend money on lawyers when we have 2 kids who could use it? I make a bit more than him, not that that really matters, but the first amount her offered, $400 for 2 kids a month, was laughable. I didn't laugh at him or anything but told him that would not be acceptable. He said he was willing to continue paying half of big expenses, which, duh? Plus he'd be driving a 5-hour round trip since he was the one moving every other weekend. I thought about it a lot and figured that I am fine financially, as much as anyone is these days, and didn't want to bankrupt him for child support. The most important thing to me was that he continued to be a present and amazing father and said I would be okay with $600 a month plus the shared big expenses. I thought he would be happy with this, but he kept grumbling that he thought $400 was more than fair. Ultimately he agreed to $600. Again, I really wanted to make this work for my kids, so please don't tell me I was an idiot for some of these things. I really went out of my way to be helpful. Like I said, I am single and have a ton of family and friends, so I had more free time. If they had things going on I never minded keeping the kids for their weekend, always encouraged the kids to be excited to go there, bought gifts from them for things like Father's/Stepmother's Day, Christmas, birthdays. I'd give I believe in love languages, but if my kids have them, it is absolutely gift giving and it's not like their asses have jobs, and even worked it out for my relative in their city to pick our kids up from their wedding ceremony since they had an adults only reception. These kind gestures were never reciprocated. I tried to brush it off and thought maybe I was just doing too much and tried to take a step back when the kids told me that some of the weekends they stayed with me, Harry and Amy had gone on vacations to places like Europe and Disney. I don't follow them on social media obviously, so I had no idea. I go on vacations too, but the idea of going on such an expensive vacation and not taking my kids sounds nuts. They're great travelers. We actually went to Japan last summer and had a blast. Maybe I'm an annoying parent, but I couldn't believe he'd leave the country or go to freaking Disney and not only not take the kids but not even let me know. I wanted to remain amicable, but after I found that out the favor stopped, and for the past few months anytime he asked me to keep them for a weekend because they had plans I'd say oh sorry, same good luck. Yes, even if it was far in advance. I wasn't trying to be petty, but it wasn't as if they were asking to switch weekends ever. It was always just skipping them. I know his family is useless, no idea about hers, but he should be able to make time for his children 4 days a month. Then a few months ago I found out he'd been asking my relatives in his city for help. Sometimes they did if they could, but not always. I didn't want to keep bothering them, so I ended up saying yes to keeping the kids more, plus I obviously love them, but I started keeping track of every time he asked me to keep them. Over a 5-month period it was 5 times. And around that time Matt had told me some pretty upsetting things and confided that he was okay staying here more. I was clear that he could tell me anything and that nothing was his fault at all. But he told me when he was at his dad's, both he and his sister needed to be in their rooms at 8 p.m. Keep in mind this is weekends. Not in bed, but they weren't allowed to be in the living room or anything or have friends over. I asked if his dad and Amy were home during these times and he said yeah, but Amy's dog is aggressive and they keep it in their room during the day, so when he and Elise go to their rooms they let the dog out so he's not cooped up all day. I love dogs, we have two, and what the fuck. Elise got a bad flu a few visits ago and apparently she had asked Harry to sleep with her in her room and he refused and said he needed to sleep with Amy. Our kids do not co-sleep, but we always let them sleep with us if they were sick and asked. I don't expect Harry and Amy to let her sleep with them or anything. Both kids are not ever allowed in their room BC of the dog, but why couldn't he have stayed with her even if it was just until she fell asleep? I did not say this to them, but told Matt and Elise that their dad had just gotten over the flu and probably just didn't want to get her sick again, which makes no sense. I know I shouldn't have lied, but they were upset. The worst emo is that when Matt randomly told his dad he wanted to see him more, he yelled at him and told him that he was seeing him a lot already and he should want his dad to be happy and not miserable and alone like his mom. I would like to again reiterate that I am very happy being single and have turned a lot of guys down. I prefer to spend my time with my friends and kids and can date when they're older. I don't like the stats on unrelated men being around kids and don't feel the need to risk it anyways, so between all this and the missed visits I decided that I needed to stand up for myself and my kids more. If Harry could go on European vacations he could afford more child support, and I was done keeping up the appearance of 50-50 custody when he only had the kids about 45 nights in 2024. So I told Harry I was going to file for updated child support and primary custody, and get everything in writing and signed off by a judge. He said he was okay raising child support. He had apparently gotten a few raises since we settled it and said he would be fine with upping it to $750. First of all, you got all these raises and didn't even think to raise it yourself despite skipping almost half your agreed visitation? And that low of an amount? I told him it was insulting and we could just let the court figure it out. He reminded me that I made much more than he did and I was like, yeah, that's why I'm able to take them on vacations when apparently you couldn't scourge up enough money to take your children to Disney World. I know that was immature, but I was pissed. He tried fighting more, but I told him I didn't intend on fighting with him outside of court and filed. Obviously, because I'm writing this, the judge agreed to almost all of my requests. Child support was increased, I have primary custody and decision making, and it can be adjusted more if he continues skipping weekends. TBH, this has all helped me with the kids and their increasing expenses and needs tremendously. We only communicate ambit text or email and it's only about the kids. But a mutual friend of ours told me that at a wedding recently Amy and Harry spent a bunch of time complaining about me, calling me high conflict and a parasite, and much worse things when they drank more, but I won't repeat them. I got upset. My only goal is for my kids to have a great childhood and a present dad, and I feel like I fucked that up. My friends told me that Harry's the one who fucked it up, but I'm really doubting myself. So Ada for pushing my ex to do more? Update 1. I'm pretty emotional now, but I think you've already changed my mind about offering to drop child support. I will be going for full 100% custody, though, unfortunately, things have degenerated since my last post. To get this out of the way, I am in therapy, usually once every other month or so. It was more often closer to the divorce, and so are my kids. I know Harry was seeing someone when he lived here, no idea if he still does. He was supposed to have the kids next weekend as scheduled. Wouldn't you believe it, but the other day he called. They got last-minute tickets to a concert out of town and asked if they kids could stay here. I let him know that I actually had plans the entire weekend that had been set months ago, so he asked if I could either bring them or if they could stay with one of my family members in my city. I normally would have done just that and pulled out my calendar and marked this off as another missed visitation, but I was just sick of it. I told him he needed to figure it out, and not to call my relatives in his city. They were not his personal free babysitters, and he was their father, so he needed to start acting like it. He got upset and said he was drowning. I almost laughed but didn't, asking him what he meant, and he said he was struggling financially due to the child support and felt like I was trying to punish him for moving. He said I was allowed to be upset we weren't together anymore, but needed to put the kids first and work with him. I couldn't believe he was saying those things. He knows why our marriage ended. He knows that I have moved mountains to make our co-parenting relationship work, and I have pages of texts and emails of him thanking me for being so accommodating and sympathetic to his situation. Some were even just a few weeks ago. I hung up. I was at work and did not have the emotional bandwidth to be lied to about this shit. He tried calling me back a few times, but I had meetings and I realized I shouldn't have spoken in anger, so I wanted to calm down. He even had his wife call me a few times, but I let it go to voicemail. She left a few cruel ones, nothing shocking, just saying I'm bitter and jealous that Harry moved on and wanted to punish them. I want to emphasize again, and I would rather cut my legs off than be back together with him. I'm the one who filed for divorce and stuck to my guns. It's like these two live in some kind of delusion where I not only want my ex back, barf, but I have never helped them once. When I got home, I pulled the calendar for the past 2 years, which had every missed visitation, including last-minute requests, all color-coded accordingly. I emailed this to both of them and said that Harry was responsible for coming up with appropriate childcare during his visitation, and that if he was finding that challenging we could look into changing the visitation schedule to something more accommodating to their busy lifestyles. Then I left to take my kids to their sports practices. I did not hear from him. Normally Harry calls our kids every school night evening around 8 p.m., but he didn't that night. I felt guilty, as I've said, the only goal here is for my kids to grow up with a present father. It might have been dumb, but I did call him that evening so he could say goodnight to them, but he sent me to voicemail. I told the kids he had gotten caught up at work, which does happen often enough that they weren't weirded out. At about 3 a.m. he sent me maybe the longest text in recorded history. I have my phone on sleep mode but keep his and my parents' numbers able to alert me for obvious reasons, and I'm a light sleeper so I did wake up. But I was half asleep, saw how long the text was, and decided it was a problem for the morning. I wish I had gotten up because he ended up sending a few more. The texts really just proved that they do not occupy the same reality as me. They were all self-centered and deranged, and even when he brought up the kids it was all about him, his wife, and their lives and feelings, saying, "I have PTO to burn and just decided to take one today because I'm so overwhelmed and upset about all of this." Yes, I did screenshot all of these for my lawyer. I don't want to be the cause of my kids' father abandoning them, but I have been at and beyond my limit for so long I don't know what to do. They both treat me so horribly and make these assumptions that are just simply not true. I want my kids to have their dad in their lives. I've run myself ragged making it work, taking up the slack when they dropped weekends, doing all of the mental heavy lifting for looking ahead and switching weekends if, for instance, Father's Day falls on mine or her birthday, when I know she doesn't want them around, falls on their weekend, and planning ahead of time / contacting them. I'm so done. I want to offer this: fine, you win. No more child support. Keep all your money. You can see the kids the weekends after Christmas and Thanksgiving, those are when they celebrate the holidays anyways, and on Father's Day, but otherwise they're with me. You too can live your child-free life and me and my kids will be just fine without you. I can't keep putting up with this abuse, I'm at my breaking point. Update 2. So, after the whole missed visitation and Harry's late-night text meltdown, I decided that I needed to take a serious step back emotionally. I wasn't going to engage in the drama or the guilt trips anymore. I was tired of being painted as the villain for simply expecting him to be a present father to his own children. My new mantra: not my circus, not my monkeys. I started going through my options with my lawyer to see what could be done about officially modifying custody further, because, at this point, Harry was acting like some overworked, financially drained martyr when in reality, I was the one doing all the heavy lifting. And here's the kicker: while he was crying poverty to me, guess who just bought a brand new car? A luxury SUV. Guess who also just put down a deposit for a 2-week European honeymoon? Harry and Amy. Guess who found out about this? Matt. And guess how? Because his dad's brilliant self decided to gush about it on speakerphone while Matt was in the room, assuming an 11-year-old wouldn't put 2 and 2 together. Matt came home furious. He asked me point blank, "Mom, if Dad is so broke from paying child support, how can he afford a new car and a fancy trip?" And honestly, I had nothing to say. Because, really, what could I say? I just told him that adults sometimes make choices that don't always make sense to kids, but that it wasn't his responsibility to worry about his dad's finances. That wasn't good enough for him. He went and texted his dad about it. Now, I never encourage my kids to get involved in adult matters, but I also refuse to police their emotions. If Matt felt upset and wanted answers, that was on Harry to handle. And boy, did he handle it poorly. Instead of reassuring Matt or explaining things in a way that made sense, Harry lost it on him. He sent this long-winded message about how Matt didn't understand adult responsibilities, that he and Amy had been sacrificing so much, seriously, and that he should be grateful for the time he does get with his dad. But the worst part? He told Matt that if he was just going to keep score like his mother, maybe he should just stay with her full-time and stop coming over if it was such a burden for him. I was livid. Matt came to me crying, saying he didn't want to go to his dad's anymore if he was just going to make him feel like a problem. He said he felt like a chore to his own father. That broke me. I texted Harry and told him we needed to talk immediately, and his response? "Not now, I'm busy." That's when I realized, he doesn't care. He doesn't actually care about these kids beyond what's convenient for him. So, I did what I should have done a long time ago. I had my lawyer file for full custody with supervised visitation only. And this is where things get really crazy. When Harry found out, he went ballistic, called me screaming, didn't answer, left me the most insane voicemail about how I was ripping his family apart. "Sir, you did that yourself," and even had Amy text me demanding that I reconsider for the sake of the kids. Oh, now you care about the kids? Amy, sit this one out. But the real kicker? He actually tried to pick the kids up from school on a day that wasn't his. Thankfully, my kids' school knows the situation, and when Harry showed up demanding to take them, the staff shut that down real quick. I got a call from the principal, and they had already called security on him because he was getting aggressive. The kids were scared. That was it for me. I told my lawyer to expedite the paperwork. And now? Court date is set. My lawyer is confident that with the evidence of missed visitations, the texts, and the school incident, Harry is going to lose big time. But here's the kicker: after weeks of radio silence, I just got an email from Harry, and guess what it says? "I think we should go back to 50-50 and work this out privately. No need to involve the courts. Let's just be reasonable." Lol, nah buddy, I'm past that, see you in court. Now on to second story. Told my infertile stepmother-in-law who traumatized my kids with slaughter videos that I'm glad she can't have children. When my wife was a teenager, her stepmother had health issues that eventually led to a hysterectomy. She and my father-in-law had been trying to conceive prior to that, and she's very open about how painful it was to become unable to have kids. She's been in therapy for years, but this is still a sore subject, so we don't bring it up. During the pandemic, Smeel became a vegetarian. While I obviously have no problem with that, no one else in the family is, and she tends to get very preachy about it. There is one specific video of cattle being slaughtered and processed that she has sent multiple family members. Because of that preachiness, my wife and I try to avoid having meals with her. I've also been told that she and Phil often eat in separate rooms. Anyway, my wife and I attended a wedding about 2 weeks ago. Our regular babysitter canceled on us at the last minute, so Phil and Smeel volunteered to watch our kids, 8M and 5F. They babysat our children once a few months ago and things went fine, so my wife and I agreed. The kids were asleep when we returned home. The next day, my daughter was very upset. She barely spoke all morning. When we sat down for lunch, she started crying and refused to eat. We tried to talk to her, but she refused to tell us what was wrong. Eventually, my son told us what happened. We had promised the kids they could have burgers for dinner. My Phil was aware of that, but he apparently fell asleep less than an hour after we left. When it was time for dinner, the kids went to ask Smeel to make the burgers, and she refused. My son offered to wake Phil up, but she said no to that too. She said she would make the kids something else for dinner. When my children started begging for the burgers, Smeel showed them the cattle video. She also apparently told them my wife was secretly against them eating meat, which is why they hesitated to tell us what she'd done. My wife and I had a talk with our kids and managed to get them to feel better. After they went to bed, we called Smeel. She confirmed she'd shown them the video. To say we're both outraged would be putting it lightly. My wife and I immediately told her we were cutting her off from our kids, and we'll probably do the same with Phil for falling asleep while he was supposed to be babysitting. Smeel started trying to defend herself. She told us she was only trying to help, and that we should be making more efforts to get our kids to eat healthy. It only made me angrier. I told her she has no idea how glad I am that she can't have children, because I'd pity the child that would have her as a mother. After that, she hung up on us. Phil has been calling and texting us. He is apologetic for falling asleep, but insists that cutting him and his wife off is an overreaction. He's also angry that I mocked Smeel's infertility. Apparently, she is distraught at what I said, and Phil is demanding I apologize to her. Honestly, I don't think I'm the asshole here, but I am wondering whether I went too far. My wife agrees it was a low blow that Smeel deserved to hear, but a low blow nonetheless. Ida? Update 1. Though my wife and I have no intention to let her back in our children's lives, I decided to apologize to Smeel for what I said. My wife and I talked a lot about the subject. She said that, based on her history with her stepmother, it really was a good thing she didn't have children. But before we had ours, my wife had always wanted to be a mother and was terrified about the possibility of not being able to. That fear got worse around the time Smeel had the hysterectomy. My wife told me her stepmother was agonized when it happened, and even though she agreed with me, she felt it might be best to apologize. Another thing that led me to make that decision was my mother. Before my brother and I were born, my parents had a stillborn daughter. They didn't talk about her much, so I didn't even think of it at the time, but my brother brought it up a few days ago. I couldn't stop thinking about her. As a parent, I can't even begin to imagine how my mother felt. I would never mention anything related to that out of anger, no matter how wrong my mother was. In the end, my wife and I agreed that, while I should apologize, we absolutely can't budge on cutting her stepmother off. We can't forgive what she did. It took us hours to convince our daughter to eat anything, not just meat. Even after that, she refused to eat meat for a few days because she didn't want to be evil. Our son wasn't as shaken, but he still had trouble sleeping for a few nights. My wife and I sat them down and had a long conversation about it. We answered every question they had as well as we could. Thankfully, we were able to reassure both our kids that eating meat wouldn't make them bad people. They are still a little distraught, but they are doing much better and eating normally again. Our main concern will always be their health and happiness. Smeel compromised both, so we had no doubts about cutting her from our lives. We called Phil and Smeel this weekend. I apologized for what I said to Smeel, but told her we were still cutting her off. As expected, she didn't take it well. She started going off about how she was trying to help our children, and we were terrible parents for depriving them of that care. I'm pretty sure she was crying. She said that it was awful that such cruel, ungrateful people could raise kids and not her, and we shouldn't allow our children to take part in something that caused so much unnecessary suffering. After about a minute of that, Phil managed to get Smeel to stop and hang up the phone. My wife later spoke with her father separately. Phil apologized again for falling asleep. He said he understood why we were upset, but promised he would never do anything like that again. We decided to forgive him, but we won't leave the kids in his care again, and he will only be allowed to see them without his wife. We have options besides our usual babysitter. Phil agreed. He invited us for a family dinner at a steakhouse my wife loved as a kid. He hasn't been there since Smeel became a vegetarian. We're going this Friday. I definitely have my regrets, but I'm satisfied with how things turned out. More than anything, I'm glad my children are alright. Watching my daughter refuse to eat was terrifying, and I will never forgive Smeal for scaring her and her brother like that. But they're getting better every day, and I think things are going to be okay.